Publizm.
We have a star coming all the way from UK, Chris van Tulleken.
It's just because of you, welcome to Norway.
It is so nice to be here, and I think I've started to realize I am the English version of Marit, that I am several years behind her. So I came to this subject 3-4 years ago, and you have been doing this now for almost a decade. So I'm very much following in your footsteps.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but well, I have been talking about this topic for some while, yes. But it's very exciting to have you here in Oslo. Really glad you did the trip. So we talked about maybe we should do we should sort of get the temperature on the audience.
I wondered how many of the room might be skeptical about the evidence around ultra-processed food. I guess I'm assuming everyone will have heard of this. You have been doing this.
I guess so. I don't think. Is there anyone here today who don't know the term ultra-processed foods? Or in Norwegian, ultraprosessert mat? No?
And is anyone here a skeptic that maybe we're trying to convert, or they're doubtful? Does anyone here work for the food industry? Oh, there's 2 skeptics at the back. Okay, that's useful.
Okay.
This will all be directed at both of you. And no one's admitting to working for Nestle or McDonald's.
No. I was suspecting that we might be preaching a little bit to the choir here today, but yeah. Anyway, let's get into the conversation. I think it'll be fun. So, I think, how's your day been? It's been busy, haven't it?
It's been amazing. I'm traveling with my wonderful mother-in-law, Christine, who's sitting there, who is explaining to various journalists the truth about my life and my eating habits. So that everything apart from that has been fun. No, we've had a wonderful time. We went to the harbour, and Kaga have treated me royally all day, so now I'm having a wonderful time. And it turns out my childhood hero, Erling Kaga, was the founder of the publisher, which I didn't know. So I was as a boy, I really looked up to him. So that's
a coincidence.
Nice synergy.
But your life must have changed quite a bit the last couple of years. So how's life for you these days?
I guess there are three big changes. My diet has changed as a result of writing the book, and my relationship. So it's not merely that I eat different food, but I have an entirely different relationship with food now, in a very positive way. And then I have an increased voice with UK food policy, so that's been very nice. And I am the target of a lot of interest by the food industry and the people they pay. So there's been some very nice stuff and some very stressful stuff. But there's definitely been a big change.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. So let's talk a little bit about your experiment, your N=1 experiment, where you had 80% ultra-processed foods for 30 days. And you're not the first doctor who's sort of risking their own health to prove some sort of, or to find out about important biological mechanisms. Were you worried before you started the diet and how that would affect you?
So a few journalists have said to me, you put your body on the line in the name of science, joining this canon of, scientific heroes who've risked it all. I ate a normal diet for a 17-year-old in the UK. So this is an entirely typical diet. I'm guessing a smaller number of people in Norway, but in the UK, this is what 20% of the population eat. It's what 20% of the population is forced to eat. This is the only food they can afford. It's the only food that is available to them. So this was hardly heroism. And at the time I did the diet, it was quite a while ago now, I was very skeptical. So I did it with an open mind, but I didn't think much would happen. And I did it not as a stunt for a book, but we did film it. But it was mainly, I was the first patient in a big research study that we're now running at University College London. So we did it. It wasn't Size Me. It wasn't a stunt. It was, we formally collected the data.
So you weren't very worried about long-term consequences before you started?
I was 41 or 2 when I started the diet. I mean, I was like, well, how bad can this be? I eat some of this food anyway. And I wanted to do the diet because when you're a middle-aged doctor, you stop eating at some point, Kentucky Fried Chicken, McDonald's for dinner every night, and you stop eating Nutella on your toast for breakfast. And so I was looking forward to eating all the food that I had sort of stopped myself eating. So I was very happy about doing it. And then, but I guess it revealed some really interesting things. So I very quickly aged. I became like all my patients who are between 40 and 50. I developed heartburn, anxiety, misery, sleeplessness. I would get up in the middle of the night and think that the food was the solution, so I'd often go and eat more ultra-processed food. And it never felt like the food was driving these problems. I mean, there were the very physical problems of, gut ache, constipation, piles. I don't know how much we want to go. I don't know.
I think this audience
Some
is
of the
all ready
audience,
for that.
Fine. I don't know the Norwegian for piles. You can translate as needed. But the problem never felt like the food. The problem felt like my work or my family, so it was a stressful month. But there were then 3 big effects that we measured, which were very robust and have been borne out now in much bigger data sets. So the first thing was I gained weight, and I gained so much weight that if I'd continued for a year, I would have doubled my body weight. We did some MRI scans. We did functional MRI and MRI spectroscopy, but what we found very strongly was that the back of my brain, so the cerebellum, these are the habit-forming automatic behavior bits of the brain, they became very connected to the addiction reward centers in the middle. And this was very surprising. It was a very robust finding, and we repeated the scans a long time after the diet and found that remained constant. What this is doing to the brains of children who grow up eating ultra-processed food from birth all the way through their brain development, we have no idea. And then we saw my hormone response to a standard meal completely change. So I drank a big, a nutritional shake, and my hunger hormones at the end of the diet didn't respond. So I remained hungry, and my satiety hormones also didn't respond. So I didn't feel full. And so this is food that is interfering with our ability to say, I am full, it is time to stop.
It's very interesting. Looking forward to the results from the bigger study, which is ongoing, right?
Yeah, it's a complex study because we're trying to compare our national nutrition guidance with an ultra-processed diet in a hospital context. So it will be complex. It's about can we measure an effect in inpatients.
Okay. How did you become curious about ultra-processed foods in the first place? What made you sort of dig into that topic?
So in the UK, I'm an infectious diseases doctor. I'm a tropical medicine doctor, and I work at our National Centre for Tropical Medicine at UCL. And as a young physician, I spent a lot of time in Central and West Africa, mainly in Central African Republic, which is really the poorest country on earth. It has the highest mortality on most indices. And I saw lots of kids die of infections, obviously, but the reason they were getting the infections was because baby food was being marketed very aggressively to their parents, and the parents could not make up the baby food with water. So the kids had this triple jeopardy where they were drinking bacteria in the liquid. The parents were becoming even poorer because they couldn't afford these products after they got a free sample. And they couldn't read the packet, so the formula was often being given very dilute. So my research switched from studying how viruses and bacteria affect the human body to studying how corporations affect the human body. And now, I should say Marit and I we have never met before today, actually, but we are collaborators on a very big series of scientific papers that are really about the commercial determinants of health and about ultra-processed food.
Which will be published in this year, hopefully.
I think that will be a very big moment in this subject this year.
Yeah. It will, yeah. So I'm curious about your UPF, or your ultra-processed diet. You write about this in the book, how you started getting cravings. You were craving more of that food, even though you were sort of full. You still craved more of that food. So when you stopped eating the ultra-processed food, did those cravings go away, and how long did it take?
So the most important experience I had writing the diet was not any of the scientific results. It was that I was basically enjoying indulging an addiction I had had for a very long time in an unrestricted way, and no one was telling me not to. In fact, I was kind of licensed to eat all this stuff. And about midway through the diet, even as I was starting to feel ill, I spoke to a collaborator. In fact, I'm sure you know Fernanda Rauber, who was on the team that developed the definition in Brazil. And we were talking about science. We were planning some other research. And she just kept saying to me, you know, Chris, this is not food. This is an industrially produced edible substance. It is not food by any definition. Food should be created to nourish you. It should be created for love. That should be its purpose. This is about profit. It is just an industrial. And she kept going on and on and on. And it was kind of frustrating. At the end of the call, I went to order, in the book it's a different meal. I had to switch things around in the book. It was actually Kentucky Fried Chicken hot wings, which would be my favorite food since I was a child. And I found I couldn't finish them. She had flicked this switch where the food had gone from being addictive to being disgusting. And we know that addiction and disgust are closely linked. Many people in this room will have had the experience. The smokers may have found that they suddenly didn't want to smoke anymore. And there's a famous book, The Easy Way to Quit Smoking. Has anyone used this book? It's by a guy called Alan Carr. It's very popular. It's the only self-help book that the World Health Organization recommend, and it's been put through randomized controlled trials, and it is as good as nicotine replacement therapy and CBT. And so part of the invitation in the front of my book is to say, don't try and stop eating this food. Eat all the way through the book, because the food will be your greatest teacher. You cannot understand this food unless you get it out on the plate and you taste it, and you look at it, and you smell it, and it does not stand up to scrutiny. And so that, for me, was the most kind of weird personal experience, and the most interesting sort of stuff that I didn't know about at all in the book is the neuroscience, which dates back to the 80s, which is that wanting and liking are two completely separate things. Now, most human beings know this because we all have the experience of wanting things we don't like. Smokers and drinkers and those who use drugs of abuse will often say this. But they are separate brain circuits, and you can want things you don't like and like things you don't want. So one of the crucial things that I would ask anyone, if they are reading the book or learning about ultra-processed food, keep eating it and ask yourself, do you like this as much as real food? And a lot of the time, you find that you want it, but you actually don't like it. And this is true of the study that you know very well, the big clinical trial done in the States by Kevin Hall. The participants did not find the ultra-processed food more delicious than the whole food, and yet they ate 500 calories a day more.
It's interesting. So I want to move on to the problems and the evidence. So could you just tell us a little bit about what kind of health problems are associated with ultra-processed diets? And also maybe emphasize a little bit what health problems are not usually linked with diets.
So this is maybe these two people just at the back who put up there. And so one of the questions when we study, there is a problem in nutrition, and you know this far better than me, that it is impossible to do big clinical trials because you can't lock people up and control their food, and people eat what they want, and it costs a huge amount of money. And you can't compare one food with another because we all eat a diet of dozens or hundreds of foods. So it's just an impossible matrix. So we're left with very small clinical trials and then big population data sets. But epidemiologists are very good at using these data sets. So we now have 80 what we call prospective cohort studies, the kind of studies that we used to link smoking with lung cancer and other lung disease. And when we build up this evidence, we have to have a sort of scale of, is there a consistent association? Do lots of different studies agree? Is it graded? i.e., if you eat more ultra-processed food, as your dosage increases, do the health outcomes get worse? Is this plausible? Like, do we have laboratory evidence from animals that means that we could imagine how things about ultra-processed food might drive weight gain, might drive cardiometabolic disease? The answer to all these questions is yes. So I think we have reached the threshold of causality using these criteria, And I would say we are as certain that ultra-processed food causes negative health outcomes, causes health problems, as we are that tobacco products cause cancer and other health problems. In terms of what we think it causes, anxiety, depression, dementia, cancers, all cancers, but particularly breast and bowel cancers, inflammatory bowel disease, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease like type 2 diabetes, weight gain and obesity, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease, and early death from all causes. So we've got quite those I think are the main causes we have.
And the kidney failures.
And
kidney failure.
And kidney failure.
Coming up, yeah.
I've got impressed with myself for getting the...
You were doing really
And there's
well.
other stuff that is sort of, there's some circumstantial evidence, but I think we're quite confident. We're particularly confident about cardiovascular disease and weight gain and early death. And so once you've established causality, the question of how does it do it is a lot less interesting. We were certain that cigarettes caused lung cancer long before we understood how the carcinogens interacted with the DNA repair pathways, for example. So causality is the most important thing. I think we also have now some really good evidence about the mechanisms by which it drives particularly weight gain, but lots of the other problems.
Yeah, the mechanisms are also starting to manifest. So, and I was going to ask you how solid this evidence is, but you already answered that. So I'm going to ask it in a different way. Can
I actually, just to underline this for those two people at the back, the evidence says that as a category of food, we're sure that ultra-processed food is harmful. That's what the evidence says. It does not allow us to say that this particular, the bread on the cover, that this particular bread is better or worse than another kind of bread, or that this bread is better or worse than a chocolate bar or ice cream. So trying to dissect what it means about each individual food is very complicated. We can make some good guesses that the bread is probably a bit better than the ice cream, but we can't be sure about that. So that is what the evidence is saying. What industry, of course, want us to do is to work out whether that bread is better than that bread and whether we can fix it all. And those questions aren't interesting because people eat dietary patterns. So the robustness, in my opinion, is very strong. The argument, I think, is really almost entirely from people who are funded by industry, and I'm sure we can get onto that.
We will get onto that. But I was going to ask you, do you think that the evidence that ultra-processed diets cause health problems, are those just as solid or more solid or less solid than other types of evidence we use to give dietary advice? Like the standard dietary advice to, increase your fiber intake or reduce your saturated fat. Have you looked at that? Can you even compare that?
This is a very sophisticated question. So I'm more interested in your answer than my answer. But here's what I'd say. To my knowledge, there is no other way of describing a dietary pattern that causes health harms that has any evidence whatsoever. So in the UK, for example, we have a category of high-fat, salt, sugar food. Or you probably have your nutrient profile model, your traffic light system. We have evidence for individual nutrients. So we know that salt elevates hypertension, causes cardiovascular disease. We know that sugar drives excess appetite and can drive metabolic disease and weight gain. We know that saturated fat causes metabolic disease, causes cardiovascular disease. But we don't have any really consistent research on using a nutrient profile model of all food about negative health outcomes. So the only definition that we have a body of work on is ultra-processed food. In terms of is it more robust than the evidence around those individual nutrients, fat, saturated fat, trans fat, sugar, and salt? Well, the problem that the epidemiology teams who started studying ultra-processed food, they generally approached it quite skeptically, because the question was, isn't this just junk food that's fatty and salty and sugary? Isn't this just another way of saying what we already know? Why do we care about processing? And so my PhD student, who's a remarkable guy called Sam Dickin, did a meta-analysis of all the studies that had been done. And what he asked was, has anyone made statistical adjustments in the data for nutrient profile? And what he discovered is in almost all of these studies, of these prospective studies, there are statistical adjustments for salt, fat, sugar, fiber, and dietary pattern. And when you fix those things, the effect of ultra-processed food remains the same in significance and in magnitude. In other words, it is the processing that seems to be really important. This was true in the clinical trial. In Kevin Hall's trial, people were locked up in metabolic wards, fed identical diets in terms of fat, salt, sugar, fiber, and deliciousness, and those on the ultra-processed diet gained weight at an enormous rate, whereas those on the unprocessed diet generally lost weight. So the processing does seem to be important in the epidemiological data and in the clinical data. And so most of the evidence around fat, salt, and sugar, by the way, I'm going a little bit off-piste here, but so I do not think we need to throw out the current nutritional guidance. I think it's fine. We should leave it in. I'm not trying to overturn anything. I'm not asking for a revolution. I just think we have to recognize the role of processing. However, none of that evidence around fat, salt, and sugar adjusted for ultra-processing. So those studies never said, is the problem salt, or is the problem the salt in the context of this bread which drives you to eat more salt? Is sugar on its own a problem in a bag of sugar, or is the sugar in lollipops and in soda, is that somehow worse for you? The other evidence, of course, that we have, I mean, I can keep going with this, but the other bit of evidence is that certainly in the South American data, families who buy fat, salt, and sugar, who buy lots of it, it is a proxy for health because it means they are cooking at home. And in Norway, in Northern Europe, in many parts of the world, we've had abundant fat, salt, sugar for home cooking for many years without pandemic obesity. So I think processing is important. The final thing is you can do a thought experiment. So we could get some lard, some pure fat, some sugar, and some salt on the table. No one wants to eat those individual ingredients. Like, no one's going to be tempted. My 3-year-old does eat sugar out of the bowl, as my mother-in-law will testify. But basically, we don't need them. If we mix together pure fat, sugar, and salt, it's still not very nice. It only becomes nice when we color it, flavor it, texturize it, and put it in a packet with a cartoon character, and then it becomes addictive. So it's the processing, the ultra-processing, that drives the excess consumption. I feel that is obvious, and I feel I could talk for another half an hour about that, but I'm going to let you ask the next question.
Okay. But we still, we have full freedom to choose our foods. So in theory, we can choose whatever we want to eat. So how are we still affected by the food industry? How did they affect our food choices?
Well, there are two sort of straightforward ways: marketing and price. So ultra-processed food now, and I see this even in Norway, but in the UK it is so ubiquitous, it sort of drowns out other food. And it is the cheapest, most affordable food. And in the UK we have much greater levels of inequality. So I'm not sure people do really have choice. But the marketing guides people to believe that ultra-processed products are very healthy. And so a good rule of thumb, if you want to know if something's ultra-processed, if there is a health claim of any kind on the pack, if it says low salt, low sugar, Cocoa Pops, Kellogg's Cocoa Pops in the UK, I may be self-aggrandizing here, but I've been talking a lot about Cocoa Pops because it's such a useful example, and because my daughter eats so much of it, or ate so much of it. On the pack now, they've changed it so it says supports the health of your entire family. Really? So wow. So it's ultra processed, obviously. So the marketing is very clever, and it's important to remember that the range of ultra processed products that we all eat, its ancestry is tobacco. So in the mid 1980s, Philip Morris bought General Foods and Kraft. R.J. Reynolds bought Nabisco. So the two biggest tobacco companies in the world bought the biggest food companies and created the biggest food and tobacco companies. And the tobacco industry took their flavor knowledge and their marketing knowledge and they applied it to food in very sophisticated ways. And so they used all the literal molecules as well as the marketing to create these addictive products, and they did it extremely skillfully. So they behave almost entirely like the tobacco industry in everything they do because they have a shared ancestry.
And now in the resistance as well, that we will get back to in a minute. Can you give us some examples of those products that we perceive as healthy but are actually quite the opposite?
So there was a paper published by some colleagues at WHO earlier this year, which led to a lot of headlines saying that ultra-processed bread, this bread, is healthy. Did you get, there was a big piece in The Guardian. And I think the bread is on the cover of the book, not because this bread is poisonous or it's the most harmful example of ultra-processed food, but because it seems like it's the most benign, and because bread is the metaphorical foundation of all our diets, and because this bread is not bread, and it has almost all of the properties of ultra-processed food that we think are harmful. So it will contain some whole grains, and those whole grains may be better in there than not in there. So it's probably better, I think, than just the pure white bread. Although when you eat the pure white bread, I think you know what you're getting into. When you smoke a cigarette, you know what you're getting into. When you eat this bread, there is this illusion of healthfulness. So this bread is really an emulsion. It's a foam of very low quality flour, palm oil, diacetyl tartaric acid esters of mono and diglycerides of fatty acids, flavorings, and sugar. It's not bread as any community on earth has ever conceived of bread, of all the thousands of traditional human breads. So I feel like the bread should be a regulated term. You should not just be able to call a weird foam sugar cake bread. We should protect that traditional knowledge. And so this I think is one of the most important products to put a label on and have people understanding it's not real. I mean, the reason that study was so hard to analyze is because all they could do in the study was say that ultra-processed bread seemed to be better than ice cream, which is not very remarkable, or whole grain bread was better than white bread. Almost no one in the data set, because I phoned up the guys who did the study, no one in the data set was eating real bread. So the comparison when they said this was healthy, in the context of a UPF diet, this is better than white bread, but no one now eats real bread. I suspect in Norway you do actually, but in the UK, 95 to 99% of our bread is supermarket bread.
Yeah, we still eat some proper bread, I think, but it's definitely, we're heading the same direction. But that's an interesting thought, that we should restrict what you could call bread. It should be traditionally baked bread.
Yes.
It should be called bread, and this ultra-processed bread should be called a bread-like edible substance or something.
I mean, champagne, bread, bread-like substance, I'm sure they could market it using that language, But champagne is champagne, Parma ham is Parma ham, bread should have a regulation.
Interesting. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about additives. Do you think additives is an important part of the UPF harmful effects of UPFs? And which ones are most problematic in your opinion?
Have you found I shy away from talking about additives because I think additives.
Do you want to switch topic?
No. I'm happy to do it. I think this is a friendly crowd, but I shy away because we've all been worried about additives. My mum. I remember my mum in the 80s angsting about numbers, and I thought, oh, Mum, you're a snob. You're a hippie. This isn't. But these are just chemicals. Humans are made of chemicals. Food's made of chemicals. What's the big deal? And I think actually additives are a significant part of the problem. But even if we don't mention the additives, we can come up with a very long list of harms. So a nice stat, and there are a couple of different sources, but we eat between 4 and 8 kilograms of additives every year, and in the UK we only buy 2 kilograms of flour per year. So that's we've gone from using flour at home for cooking to now eating so much ultra-processed food. We're eating 8 white bags of weird powders. I think the additives that are, what's your list? What are do you have a list of additives that are like big categories that you worry about? Do you and I agree on this?
I think, well, some of them will drive our consumption, and I don't know how problematic that is. That would be the aromas and stuff. But I'm worried about the emulsifiers because how they behave in the digestive system and how they seem to affect the microbiome and the natural defenses in the gut and these things. So those are the ones that worry.
Good.
me.
Okay, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So I would say emulsifiers and maybe non-nutritive sweeteners. So emulsifiers, the human body is an emulsion. Emulsifiers are molecules that bind fat to water. So all the cells in our body have a fatty outside and a liquid middle, and the cells are more or less suspended in liquid. So the whole body is an emulsion. And milk is an emulsion, egg yolks are emulsifiers, mustard when you make salad dressing is an emulsifier. You can use cornstarch as an emulsifier. So there are lots of naturally occurring emulsifiers that chefs have used skillfully to create smoothness in food. The synthetic emulsifiers, carboxymethylcellulose, polysorbate 80, the lecithins, the diacetyl tartaric acid esters, these seem to function as in simple terms, I think of them like detergents, because detergents are also emulsifiers. They scrub out the gut. Your gut, from your mouth to your anus, you have a layer of protective mucus. That is the first immune barrier. They scrub that out. The biggest immune organ in your body are the 10 to 100 trillion bacteria that live in your colon. These are also the species are changed, and the number of them are changed by the emulsifiers. And when you do that, certainly there's some human data and a lot of animal data, you get this inflammation. And when your gut is inflamed, it leaks, and you leak shit to your own liver. Can we say that? I mean, I think it's a very similar pathology that we see with alcohol, excess alcohol use. And you set up a cycle of inflammation. And there's lots of reason, I think, there's lots of mechanistic understanding that I think it would be plausible to say that is a significant driver of the epidemic of cancer that we're seeing in young people. Inflammatory bowel disease is on the rise, fatty liver disease. It's possible to imagine how that would drive all of them. I think within the emulsifiers, we also have all those modified starches, maltodextrins, and they seem to, some of them are also used to make pasty emulsions, and I think they also seem to drive some inflammation. Some of this data, the skeptics could very reasonably say, well, humans aren't rats. Most of the data is in rats. You can't prove that emulsifiers are harmful, and the European Food Safety Agency says they're okay. I feel the burden of proof is not on you and I when it comes to putting synthetic molecules in food. The burden of proof should very heavily be on industry to show that synthetic emulsifiers are completely safe over many decades at reasonable uses in combination with other foods. And that data, so then industry, I've had this argument, they say, but you wouldn't trust our data. And they're absolutely right, I wouldn't. So that data has to be put through a stringent regulator, like pharmaceutical companies pay for drug trials, it costs hundreds of millions of pounds, and then it's put through a regulator that is pretty independent. We regulate drugs somewhat well. That's a separate conversation. They're regulated well. So that's how food additives should be regulated, in my view. If you're not sure, we know you can make really great food that's healthy without any additives. We've known that for millennia. Why should I have to defend against phosphoric acid in my kids' drinks?
So why are all these additives in our food then?
So my research now, part of with some of the authors that we work with together, I publish now mainly with economists. So I guess the second big crux bit of understanding in the book was I'd known for a long time the food industry was behaving in an evil way. And so it seemed important to criticize them, and then they would change. But when I spoke to a friend I spoke to a lot of the banking sector who deal with food. So I spoke to investment and fund managers, the people who own the food industry. And someone at BlackRock said to me, I said, look, why can't Nestle just sell healthy food? And they said, well, Nestle and Danone are not in control of their business model. So she happened to work at BlackRock. BlackRock many people in this room, your pensions will be with BlackRock or with Vanguard or with Jupiter, with UPS, with these enormous asset managers, these investment funds with trillions of dollars. And if Danone stopped making money, which they did under Emmanuel Faber, their previous CEO, who tried, I think, in good faith to create a healthier product portfolio, the Danone share price dropped, their revenue dropped. He was fired by activist investors and replaced, and the portfolio was realigned, and Danone share price went back up into parity with Nestle. So the companies are not in control. Their hands are tied. So when I said to my friend at BlackRock, well, oh, so you're the problem? She said, no, you're the problem, Chris, because your private pension is at BlackRock because I told you to put it there. So the argument we try and make in the research we're doing now is that we're stuck with this system of financialized growth where the purpose of the food is to make money. Everyone in that system is trapped. We're all going to retire. We all want our pensions. The only people who can intervene are governments. So we're trying to make a robust argument for big government to come in and regulate like they did with the tobacco industry. So anyone who says to me, oh, I can partner with the food industry, I'm a media doctor, but I'm going to go and work, on the inside of a big food company and I'm going to change them around, it will be impossible. If the CEO of Danone can't do it, you definitely can't do it. So that's the argument for government regulation, and it is the strongest argument for why people like you and I must really not take a single solitary penny from the manufacturers of ultra-processed food.
That's interesting. So that's moving us towards the solutions there, the regulations. So I kind of want to ask you, if we are able to regulate the food industry, would we actually do them a favor because they're not able to regulate themselves?
So behind closed doors, for the book, I spoke to everyone from the people selling the food into the shops through to the CEO of the second biggest ice cream company in the world and many of the bankers in between. Behind closed doors, they all say, we love some regulation. At Danone, they've come out again and publicly said they'd like regulation. Regulation is completely compatible with economic growth. So one of the arguments I try and make is if there may be people in this room who are politically right-leaning, who want a strong military, a good football team, a powerful economy, all of that requires a population that has a really good diet and a well-regulated food industry. And generally, we see in big industrial sectors, with pharma, we saw tightening of regulation around the millennium and massive upsurge in growth following regulation. So this won't be bad for industry. Some companies will really struggle, but we'll see the birth of lots of new companies that will provide better food. So yes, part of it is they would like that. Part of it is there are lots of nice people who work in the food industry who know they're harming kids and grown-ups, and they would like to stop doing it. But if any one person at any one company goes, well, we'll just sell broccoli, their company will fold and it will make no difference. So
I guess they could sell better bread within the same, the same industry.
I think this question started, and I completely avoided it, is why are the additives there? So if you're running a food company, you have to sell more food. You have to make more money for your owners every year. This is all companies. This is what they have to do. If you have owners, you have to make them more money every year. And the way you do it is you crush down the price of ingredients, so use the cheapest possible ingredients, and you make the food more and more addictive, so people buy and eat more and more of it. And so all of the additives are replacing real food. You should never use a strawberry if you can use strawberry flavor. You'd be an idiot to use an egg when you could use a synthetic emulsifier. Eggs are full of salmonella, they spoil, you have to feed a chicken. It's a nightmare. You got to crack the shells. It's like it doesn't work.
And they're expensive.
And they're expensive, whereas synthetic emulsifier, you just, create it in a lab. It costs pennies,
But who's really responsible for the negative health effects from
who are the bad guys?
Ultra-processed foods?
Who are the bad guys? I'm very clear about the bad guys. So the bad guys are not the CEO of Coke, Nestle. It's not the people on the investment side. The bad guys are the people who have a choice. So, and those people are really politicians and public facing scientists. So I am offered every week significant amounts of money to do lots of things with the food industry because it will essentially shut me up. And I have a choice, and doctors are particularly difficult because doctors all have a choice. We signed up to do another job. We're generally paid quite well. We don't need to take the money. And yet, in the ecosystem of communication around food, the scientists and the doctors who do the research, who talk about the research, who tweet about you and I on Twitter, who work for the charities that promote policy, they are nearly universally funded by the companies that make ultra-processed food. So it's the people who are conflicted that are the problem. Because if you and I had to have a row with the owner of Nestle, it would be easy. You know, everyone sees them for what they are. They're selling food. That's their job. That's okay. And we can have an honest discussion. The difficulty is the debate with someone who appears credible but is taking money from one of the big food companies. So they are the bad people, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So how can we counter that?
It's very hard in my hierarchy of technical policy solutions. That's really difficult. You can have transparency laws, but you probably can't prevent it happening. What we can have is a cultural shift where there is not a single physician in Norway facing the pub, and we're in the sort of presence of the Norwegian royalty when it comes to public health and podcasts. No one takes money from Philip Morris, from the big tobacco companies. It would be unheard of. None of the charities take money from tobacco companies. So culturally, I think people are starting to accept that the food industry was owned by the tobacco industry. They make an addictive product. It's harmful. They know they're doing it. They're doing all the same things to resist legislation. And so I think we can create a culture where it is shameful to take their money. And that is sort of the business I'm in. Without trying to shame individuals, although sometimes you have to do that, I think it should be shameful to take the money of a big food company and then talk about food and health.
Yes, I agree. But how can we better inform the consumers, and how can we lead them to better food choices? Can we work with labeling better than we have done so far, in your opinion?
The way I try and position myself is I'm a very particular kind of person. I'm a middle-aged white man with privilege, and I can choose what I eat. And I don't think anyone wants to hear another person like me giving them advice about their diet. My view is that I have no opinion on what any one person in this room should eat. I don't care what you feed your children. What I care about is that you actually have choice and you have all the available information you need. And then if you choose to eat ultra-processed food, that's entirely up to you. And I don't think you should be shamed or stigmatized for it. Similarly, if you smoke. So if people smoke now, it's on the packet, there's a public health campaign. It is a bit more of a choice. People are at least doing something in an informed way. It's not aggressively marketed. So my ambition is not to actually reduce UPF. It's to create real choice with front of packet warnings, with marketing restrictions, and with improving the price and availability of healthy food. What we actually know is that when people can afford good food, when they understand bad food, they make very different choices. So the outcome will be the same. But I think the language and the framing is quite important, that I don't want anyone to feel, and I hope I've written the book like that. It's not about going, you should eat less UPF. It's just going, I think you should know what this is doing to you, and you can then make a choice, and you should understand how the companies work. And then you can decide if you want to buy products from a company that does this to children in other countries.
The conversation about the ultra-processed foods is not really about single products. It's about diets and dietary patterns, as we say. But still, if you could remove one product or a product group from the face of the earth, just like with snap, what would it be?
I'm gonna say there is not. I'm quite libertarian, so I would not ban anything. I would not ban drugs of abuse. I would have them extremely well regulated. I would protect children from them. I would not market them. I would heavily tax them. Same with tobacco.
Use magic and make it disappear.
But if the question is what do I think is the most harmful ultra-processed food, I think it's those ones that pretend hard to be healthy. So it's the diet drinks. So I had a friend at UNICEF who said if you could have this one intervention, public health intervention, it would be that children should only drink milk and water. And that would have that more than treating tuberculosis, solving malaria, treating HIV, that single intervention would save the most lives and reduce human suffering, and it would be so efficient. So the one thing my kids, and I think this is true, Christine, I think the kids never drink really fizzy drinks, and they don't drink diet drinks either. Whereas on average in the UK, a typical 3-year-old, and I have a 3-year-old, drinks an entire can of artificially sweetened beverage every single day. That's the average consumption. So it's not that they are the most harmful products, but they are posing as completely harmless. And I think that's profoundly wrong.
Since we're speaking of these diet drinks, I have another question for you. You're not afraid to use very clear language, but as academics, we're supposed to make all kinds of reservations and never say anything clear. But you say things like, these diet drinks will dissolve your teeth and make you pee out your skeleton.
So,
you said it in the podcast.
No, I'll say this. So,
not in the book.
So there is some.
But how do you balance sort of the?
No, I'll repeat. I'm very happy to clarify that. So I have said. So in fact, I've just written another chapter for the paperback version of this book, in which I say the diet drinks are a problem because they contain. Almost all of them contain citric acid and phosphoric acid. Now, both of these acids are not. Citric acid has nothing to do with lemons. It happens to be in lemons. It's industrially synthesized. Phosphoric acid is obviously industrially synthesized. Both of them dissolve your teeth. But we have quite good evidence, I think, that when you drink a lot of phosphoric acid, in order to buffer it in your bloodstream, in order to stop it changing the pH of your blood, you leach minerals out of your skeleton and you pee out the calcium in your bones. And so if you are a woman particularly, you're at increased risk of bone density, of osteoporosis. And I think this is a real risk. Now, can I prove it? Absolutely not. There's some framing and data. There's some rat models. It's quite flimsy evidence. But does it make sense in what we understand about bone and blood biochemistry? I think there are people in the audience who know. There's probably some biochemistry PhDs who can come and talk to me afterwards about this. But does it make sense? Yeah, it does. And I write it not because I think it's absolutely hard fact, but because I think it's a really useful thing to have in your head the next time you're drinking your Diet Coke, is that when you have a pee, you're peeing out your bone minerals. If it's not 100% true, I work very hard that everything is evidenced in the book, but there are moments where I'm happy to discuss you. But I always put the reference in, and you can go and look it up.
Yeah, I love that. But do you face criticism for being too populist?
Looking at my mother-in-law here, do I? Yeah, I don't think so, because actually, we talk solutions. What do I want? Do I want to ban this food? No. Do I want to tax it? No. What I want is to put simple warning labels on food actually using a nutrient profile model. So using fat, salt, and sugar is the best system. It's very easy. To put black hexagons on food, that's what they do in Mexico, in Argentina, in South America. Works very well, shifts processing. I want to get the cartoon characters off the packets of the unhealthy food. And I'd like it in the nutritional guidance. It's hardly a revolution. I haven't asked to throw out any nutritional guidance. I'm not banning a single thing. I'd like some sweets and candy on a different shelf so the kids aren't looking at them, because that will make my life easier with my kids. So I think what I'm asking for is mild, and I hope I'm not selling anyone a fad diet. What you and I mean, we were just talking about this. What you and I and our colleagues and collaborators are asking for is so straightforward. It's this proposition that people understood 60, 70 years ago, which is that if you eat real food, the traditional food of your community, it will bind you together to the people you love. It will create health. It will preserve traditional knowledge. It will be fun to do. It will be delicious, and it will help you live a long and healthy life. I mean, this is not rocket science. If you eat food, the purpose of which is to generate financialized growth and dividend production for pension funds, it's less likely to be good for you. It might coincidentally be good for you, but it probably won't be, because that's not its intention. Its intention is to get you to eat as much of it as you possibly can.
So what will the future look like for the future generations if we're not able to turn this over?
I mean, you and I have talked about this. Am I an optimist or a pessimist? I think I have days, I suspect, like you, where I feel terribly pessimistic. The tobacco industry is the best comparator. We have regulated tobacco. Not a single person in this room is currently smoking. I think it's illegal. I'm guessing it's illegal.
It is.
And I'm guessing, when you walk around, no one else is smoking out on the streets. We've got it somewhat. It's not as low level as it should be, but we did succeed. But the gap between knowing that smoking caused cancer and effective regulation was 55 to 60 years. Now, I think if we use the template that we use to control tobacco, to control food, if we bring in warning systems, if we end the conflicts of interest with the government committees, if we end the charities taking money, and if we put warnings in our national guidance, I think it will happen quicker. But there is no question, there are a tiny number of people, I mean, our collaborators, academics globally, who really feel strongly about this. It's a few hundred of us, maybe, versus an industry that has an annual marketing budget of tens of billions of dollars. So, but we did get there with tobacco, and I feel like we will get there with food. I mean, this is cool. Everyone showed up. Everyone's listened. I feel like it's simple stuff, and I think people are up for it.
I think so, and I hope you're right. Yeah. Does anyone like to ask Chris a question at the back? Can you stand up and shout out?
Thank you for a wonderful talk. And I have to say, Marit, I loved your book. It was wonderful. Chris, I'm looking forward to reading yours. It's in the bag. I just haven't gotten to it. Okay. So I have one question. I have many questions, but one first. The book's been out since April, and I'm wondering, what part of the book do you find that people don't pay enough attention to?
I got two answers. There's a whole chapter that I was told to leave out about how during World War II, the German military made synthetic butter entirely from coal. And that was my favorite chapter to write. It is a complete detour. It has no relevance to the rest. I mean, it has a metaphorical relevance to the rest of the book. But anyway, I just enjoyed that. I think the chapter that people struggle with, when I was writing it, I approached this as a doctor going, obviously, some of pandemic obesity must be to do with inactivity. My children live on their screens. They live indoors. We all do, and we all are sedentary. And so I wondered if I was writing a book about 40% of the problem or 60% of the problem, how much is food really driving weight gain? And the book is not just about weight, but that is what draws a lot of people to this subject. At the end of that chapter, I was entirely convinced that when it comes to pandemic obesity, inactivity is playing a role that is probably 5% or less, okay? Inactivity is a terrible health crisis. It's extremely bad for us, but it does not drive weight gain. And the reasons for that are incredibly kind of unexpected. That the thing I enjoyed was that there's very good science showing that exercise of the kind we do, does not massively change the calories we burn. But more than that, Coca-Cola particularly had funded an entire network of scientific papers, and that was the literature saying that you could run off calories, that you could outrun an unhealthy diet. So there's a lovely synergy between some great independent science showing the truth and the cover-up by the food industry. And it's just, it's an elegant chapter, not because I wrote it well, but because the stories just mix really beautifully. So that to me is very important. It's very, very counterintuitive, but I'm happy to talk about it with anyone afterwards.
Thank you.
So can I do the voice? He came out on a podcast and he said, "Oh, ultra-processed food, that's just a hype." Did I do it? Was that he did it like that? Yes. Well, I don't know about him personally. We have a lot of people doing this in the United Kingdom. They are always funded by companies that make ultra-processed food, or they sit on the boards of charities that are funded by companies that make ultra-processed food, or they run university nutrition departments that are funded by makers of ultra-processed food. So I see this as like climate change. For a long time, our state broadcaster, the BBC, in all debates, whether it's about two sides in a war, you have to have balance. If it's a political discussion, you have to have balance. So with climate change, you'd always have like an independent scientist, and then you'd have some guy from Shell or BP going, well, this is all a fad, it's hype. Now we've accepted that with climate change, you don't need that balance. I think what I see is that there is such universal agreement among independent scientists that we might argue about little bits of data, but no one's arguing this food is fine or it's ultra-processed food is invalid. The only pushback, and we've published on this as well, the only pushback is from industry. How to solve that? You have to stop conflicts of interest within your government committee. In the UK, our Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition has 15 members. 7 of them have relationships with companies like Coca-Cola. And there is one person on our committee who works within the food industry. He's the industry representative in the regulator. Now, in pharma, that would be unheard of. In the European Medicines Agency, you don't have like a guy from Pfizer sitting on the regulatory committee for vaccines. No one would put up with it. So, yeah, how to deal with it? It is just constantly calling it out. And the most important thing is that Marit and I, we do not start partnering with the food industry. You're not going to do that, are you? No, good.
I don't know.
I've got you on record now.
Good.
I wonder, do you think the boom of the GLP-1 analogs are linked to the ultra-processed food and the popularity these medications has nowadays? Could you say something about that?
So what's the relationship between the GLP-1 analogs, Wegovy, Ozempic, semaglutide, and ultra-processed food? So my view is when we have a pandemic of lung cancer caused by tobacco, we must celebrate new treatments for lung cancer. Absolutely. And we should spend money on them, and we should treat people who are living with cancer. And we should not hesitate about that. We shouldn't shame people who need those treatments. But we must never, ever let the budget for treating it overwhelm the budget for preventing it, nor the focus on those drugs distract us from preventing the problem in the first place. Because the drugs do not work as well in real life as they did in the trials. And the drugs reverse a degree of weight gain. The drugs do not. If you are taking semaglutide and you continue eating ultra-processed food, you may achieve normal weight or reduced weight, but you're still at increased risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, anxiety, depression, inflammatory bowel disease. It doesn't fix all your problems with your microbiome. You're still eating emulsifiers, non-nutritive sweeteners. So I think the difficulty with these drugs is they are catastrophically expensive, and we cannot afford to give them to the 60% of us, myself included. I mean, I am just on the cusp of overweight. You know, I would benefit from these. I would, we could probably demonstrate I would get a health benefit. We can't afford to give them to the 60% of us that need them. So, you know, they are not a solution. They're treating cancer. They're not dealing with, it's very cheap to feed kids well, basically. It's extremely cheap, and everyone benefits, and the kids learn more. They're more productive, and they're taller. So in Norway, it's worth saying, my favorite stat in the book is that in Norway, at the age of 5, so the age of my eldest is 6, okay, Norwegian kids are that much taller than our kids in the UK at the age of 5. And when I come here, it's very obvious the grown-up, I'm a very average height in Norway, whereas in UK I'm tall. So we are stunted. You will find in Norway that children become more and more stunted. They will get shorter and wider as your percentage of UPF goes up. We're sure that's its effect. Sorry, I can't be brief about this stuff. So seed oils, there's probably quite a lot of seed oil anxiety in the room. I'm going to try and restrict my answer to the way I understand the evidence, but Marit, you must leap in here. I am unclear about the population effects of, let's say, sort of non-refined bleach deodorized seed oils. I suspect that almost all the seed oils that we eat, unless you're having extra virgin olive or rapeseed oil, almost all the rest of it is put through these edible oil refineries. So it's refined, bleached, deodorized, interesterified, and then hydrogenated. And the reason for that is so that liquid fat can be turned into a fat with any melting point. And any of the bakers in the room know that, you know, if you're making pancakes, you want an oil, and if you're making a cake, you need butter, and so you need everything in between in order to get the sort of structures. So I suspect those oils are one of the aspects of ultra-processed food that are somewhat inflammatory and harmful. I also suspect that some of the evidence about that is jumbled up with the fact they're part of these harmful products.
Like
so
puzzle piece. Like.
Yeah, and I think again the evidence that the polyunsaturated oils, the seed oils, are good for us is not very well adjusted for processing. So I'm a bit confused about the data. Do you have a sort of stronger view?
I agree with you. I don't think they're adjusted for processing at all. So the question is, if you use those seed oils in a whole food context and prepared your meals from whole foods, would you have a negative effect?
Yeah.
Or is it sort of the combination of all the problems?
What the scientists in Brazil saw and this is, there are lots of data sets, if you are cooking with sunflower oil at home, it will be RBD, sunflower oil. That seems to be a sign of health. So I'm much more worried about a diet that is engineered for money and to generate excess consumption than I am about any one ingredient. There are lots of people here who might be cooking at home with xanthan gum, for example, or might be
bacterial slime.
Bacterial slime, but it's good if if you live with celiac disease, you cook with xanthan gum, you do home baking with it. You are not ultra processing. You're doing home baking. You're making food with love. You're not making food to drive excess consumption. You're just using an ingredient. So the individual ingredients, I'm less concerned about. If you're home cooking with sunflower oil, and that's if you can't afford extra virgin olive oil or organic butter, I think you're ahead of if you're consuming that oil in UPF. That's how I feel.
I would agree. If you're cooking at home, I think
if you're cooking at home, you're doing a great job. Don't sweat too much about how you're doing it.
And with that, I think we're going to have to end this nice conversation. I guess we could sit here forever and talk about ultra-processed foods and all the detail and all the knowledge that you provided in this book. But thank you so much. It's been great.
Marit, thank you so much for having me. And thank you all for listening and for your amazing questions. That was really fun.